Welcome, everyone. Today, we are honored to welcome Professor Phoebe Barnard to the Terra Torrent Dialogue Series as part of Terra Confluence 2024, which is an initiative by a Global Climate Association to mark Earth Day this year. Professor Barnard is a celebrated global change scientist and conservation biologist holding prestigious positions as an affiliate professor at the University of Washington and an associate science policy and communication strategist at the Conservation Biology Institute. Her work spans the globe as she is the founding CEO of Stable Planet Alliance, the Climate Restorers, and Girl Planet Earth. Her illustrious career also includes roles as a research associate at both the Fitzpatrick Institute of African Ornithology and the African Climate and Development Initiative at the University of Cape Town, and her work spans for over 34 years of uh, being in South Africa. Dr. Barnard's significant contributions to the conservation biology have earned her numerous accolades, including the Society for Conservation Biology Distinguished Service Award and the Forbes Award for Distinguished Professional Achievement from Bancroft School. Dr. Barnard's expertise will greatly enrich our dialogue on forging sustainable futures and navigating environmental challenges such as climate change. So, with these little few words, I would really like to welcome you to our event, the conversation today. Thank you so much, Phoebe, for talking to us.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm a little bit embarrassed. You read so many things, and apologies, I may have sent you a slightly outdated bio, but most of that is right. It's just probably I should have sent you just one or two lines, but thank you so much.
Oh, you have done so much throughout spanning your throughout your career. I think this is like nothing to be embarrassed about. A lot of things you have been doing, and to begin with our the discussion we have in mind today. So something about global ecological connectivity. I wanted to ask you, how can global ecological connectivity strategies enhance biodiversity conservation and climate resilience? To give it a more context, we as human, we consider to be the on top of the ecological pyramid and not really a part of with the other organisms. We consider the other living beings, natural resources to be on earth just to serve us. So, keeping those thoughts in mind, what can certain strategies can be followed for creating a global ecological connectivity?
It's a very, very important question, and it's quite central to the work that I've been doing over the last couple of decades, especially. We have really transformed the Earth so profoundly with now 8 billion people on the planet. And, you know, the mindset that you speak of being at the top of the pyramid is really quite fundamental to the problems that we face. Our mindset of human superiority, one might say human supremacy, in just the same way that people talk about gender supremacy or race supremacy. It's a very toxic thing, and it has over the last centuries driven us to really transform the earth with infrastructure, with human settlements, with many things that are blocking off the natural movements of animals and indeed of plenty of species. Even trees struggle to cross major cities as they move, you know, from generation to generation through their seeds and their pollen as they try to move with climate change. So we have created fundamental barriers all around the earth. I was lucky to work for a short while, for some months, as a consultant to a wonderful organization that I'd like to call out, the Center for Large Landscape Conservation in the USA, in Montana, the state of Montana. And Gary Tabor, the CEO of the CLLC, Center for Large Landscape Conservation, is also the real creative genius behind the IUCN's Connectivity Conservation Specialist Group. So this body actually has a global role, really trying to get people around the world to think carefully about ecological connectivity and how it's quite contrary to our sense of human connectivity. When we think of human connectivity, we think, oh, I can get in my car and drive on a super highway down to Los Angeles or to Delhi or to Bangkok. And that's fantastic. You know, I feel connected. I feel that, you know, I can make a phone call. I've got my internet and my cell phone towers everywhere. All of that creates obstacles for the other 10 million species or more with which we share the planet. So I've started to work on connectivity both in the terrestrial and the marine environments. We can have strategies with the best of intentions of how to help species to migrate with climate change. And I've been lucky to work on birds from a climate migration point of view, and also recently to work with humans on a climate migration point of view. But the more highways, the more linear infrastructure that we have, the harder it gets. So a good strategy for increasing human ecological connectivity, given our intense human connectivity over the next century, is going to be a challenge. Hard linear infrastructure like highways and railway lines is fixed. It's very difficult to pick it up and remove it. And you know that probably the strategy of building bridges or tunnels under such infrastructure so that animals can migrate it's a start. It's not enough. We may have to put a lot more thought into this, but you know, frankly, we have been treating the earth as our food pantry, as our playground, as our, you know, super highway for fun and recreation and transport and industry. So all of those things will continue to take precedence until we are able to start changing our mindsets about our place in nature and change our relationships, not only with nature, but with each other.
Thank you for pointing that out, and you have actually spoken exactly what me and many other people are thinking, that there's a problem with the human supremacy. We just think that the ecosystem and everything is there to serve us and nothing more than that. So that mindset needs to be changed for, I mean, like to make some shift happening. And on that, there's a little bit off topic question that I have is for for a local level mindset change to create a connectivity with nature. eh, What we have witnessed, I have been talking to several people all over the world and during my work, the people or the families who have maybe has a pet, maybe have animals living with them, maybe are living in suburb or in rural landscapes, they understand the animals and these nature. They have a more personal connection to them, and they are more wholesome beings and more kinder to everyone in general. So would you, I mean, like this is an observation I made. I do not know about research, but would you consider that as something we can maybe make that into a trend? Like everything is a trend these days to have little children, you know, have pets and take care of them as their own families, and maybe something, because in an urban setup it is difficult to have a big forest, and maybe take care of a small plant or something like that. Would that help in bringing in the connectivity?
Almost every day I read about youth groups and other groups that are helping children learn nurturing skills and caretaking skills, like looking after young trees that they're developing to grow into mature trees, or looking after a puppy or a small baby. There are many things that can be done. However, I would say that a lot of these things are so influenced by culture, and the whole culture has to shift if we're going to be able to make progress. Parents can do a lot of good at helping their children learn nurturing skills, but we can all think of countries where dogs or other pets are quite abused. They're kicked in the streets. We can think of places where birds are caught out of the forest and kept in tiny cages in people's houses just for mild entertainment, despite the fact that it's essentially a tiny prison for that bird for all of its life. We have a habit of dissociating ourselves from animals when it's convenient. For example, if we are producing them for food. And so many people don't ever see the animal that their piece of meat comes from. It just comes in the supermarket wrapped in plastic on a styrofoam tray, or they may buy it from a hawker, but it's far removed. So yes, there's a lot that can be done with teaching to remind us all that we not only have rights, but we have responsibilities. And our responsibilities are to each other and to nature, and to treat this world a little bit more wisely and kindly and with greater humility than perhaps humanity has generally done in the last century. And that needs to be a cultural imperative. It needs to come from faith communities. It needs to come from political leaders. It needs to come from teachers and artists and everybody, or it will not be enough to change.
True, that is very well said. I completely agree with that. And
Thank
with
you.
that, I would like to go on to the next question that I have for you is something about you talked about marine conservation challenges. So, what are the critical challenges and opportunities in marine conservation today, and how can they inform broader climate action strategies as a whole? Considering there was one big win for marine conservation last year, that was the high seas treaties being incorporated. So could you say something about that?
I think yeah, thank you for that question. I think that the threats to marine biodiversity and ecosystems are in some respects quite comparable to land threats, even though the ocean is, a nebulous environment where things circulate more than they do on land. But if you look at it, we have profound climate change heating up the sea, causing coral bleaching, causing the movement and population declines of marine species. We've got huge marine pollution because we have been treating the oceans as a sewer, out of sight, out of mind. We certainly have overexploitation with the kinds of issues that you talk about with the high seas and the tragedy of the commons, with everybody going to try to plunder the high seas because it's easier to catch enormous quantities of fish in factory ships and freeze them out at sea and then just deliver food to this voracious global machine of food systems. So many things have to change. Of course, there are a number of sub-issues of those things, with, for example, coastal communities being disenfranchised from the resources that they have long had stewardship over in the past. And, a number of smaller conservation issues. But I think it really boils down to climate change, pollution, and toxicity, and overharvesting. It's a set of tragedies that we need to become so much more aware of and really talk about how we're going to do better. People may or may not be interested in that particular topic, but I think most people are interested in the idea that the future is becoming much less stable, much less predictable than it has been during our lifetimes and our parents' lifetimes. And we have to choose what kind of people we wish to be in these times, because instability can make us the worst kind of people that we can be. And so if we don't choose to consciously and visibly to be the best people that we can be, it will be easy for things to go pear-shaped, as we say in English, you know. I
That
would
is
hate to see that.
That is completely true, actually. And what I feel is the currently when we are going through this phase of everybody competing with each other, consuming more and more, which is more than that is necessary. This is where this all over extraction, over use of natural resources and destruction comes from. I have one small example that I want to quickly share with you about cultural, how culture can have a positive impact on the conservation strategies. So we have a certain fish in I live in eastern part of India, which is like in Bihar, and I am a Bengali. I speak Bangla. My native tongue is Bangla. And there's Sundarbans in eastern part of India, and there's a particular fish known as Ilish Mach, Hilsa fish, which is very famous, and it is like a very it is quite pricey, and that fish only occurs on the mouth of the delta in a particular times of the year. So we have a certain tradition in Bengali culture, that is to have those fish in the last day of a festival around October or November, which is Dashera. Then for the next 4 months, you are not really supposed to eat that because there is the breeding time and maybe the fish is growing. Again, there's another cultural norm to eat it during Saraswati Puja, the spring that occurs in February. So that 4 or 5 month periods, it is like more of a religious thing that people believe, religious and cultural. So they'll eat it during the September and October, and the next 4 months they do not have that fish. And then again they'll have it in February and then that point of time. So the fish gets the time to grow, to get into a certain age, and then they are again eaten. So those sort of traditions, if they are maybe again revisited, that might help in creating those like the safety nets for the creatures to survive. So I don't know what you think about that.
I'm glad you mentioned that, actually, because you're reminding me that some years ago, maybe quite a few years ago, I'm embarrassed to say, I did read something really interesting about the use of fish in that ceremony, and just as you say, the taboo against then continuing to eat the fish. And it's very parallel to some traditional practices in Africa, where I lived, actually not just in South Africa, but mainly in Namibia and South Africa, where there would be similar taboos against continuing use. There would be a harvesting period, and then people had to leave the resource alone. And so I was wondering if you referred to it being kind of a religious taboo more than perhaps a legal taboo. Is that what I
Yeah,
understood?
yes, yes, that's true. It is not a legal taboo, it is more cultural, and it is not also religious, more cultural. Everybody who's of that belong to that culture, they follow that tradition, basically.
And that's the important thing, because I think in many parts of the world, cultural traditions are breaking down. Traditional authorities in many parts of Africa, and I think in many parts of the world, are breaking down. And so people feel that the pressure of the global market is tempting them to override these traditions, we find that that's when species go extinct quite quickly. If the fish don't have enough time to breed up again, it's a slightly different situation, but when we have fire-driven ecosystems, as we do in many of the Mediterranean type ecosystems of the world, particularly the Mediterranean itself, but also Southern Africa, Western Australia, Chile, and California, and so on. People love to start fires for their own entertainment, and then the fire burns so frequently that trees and other plants don't have time to grow up and set seed before another fire comes through. And so that frequency, and it's not necessarily economically driven, it's just kind of arson driven. But those kinds of things can quickly drive species to extinction. So whether it's over harvesting, over, just constant pressure on a resource, or whether it's increasing fire frequencies and things like that, the breakdown of taboos is profoundly important. There's a reason that those taboos and traditional practices are there. And they mainly do come from ancient cultures, such as most cultures in India, traditional cultures, and indigenous cultures around the world. And that's why in the work that I'm doing now with the Global Restoration Collaborative that I am convening, we're bringing together global alliances, including indigenous, what I call indigenous cultural bridges, these individuals from indigenous cultures who feel a calling to step up to help the rest of humanity reconnect with those traditional values and practices and lessons, I guess, that looking forward multiple generations into the future and looking backwards for guidance from ancestors. That's something that global Western culture is really, really bad at. And we need to be reminded that we are just a flash in the pan as a rather stupid and not very wise, supposedly successful culture. Yes, in some ways, but very short-lived success.
That is perfectly said, that we have to like embrace the ancient wisdoms and make it into a the information has to be passed down, because those are also being lost due to climate change and like climate migration and other several other reasons. And there's a need to have those. Even the work that we are doing at Global Climate Association, mostly education related, what we are trying is to create a climate communication channel, which is a framework where we are taking information not just from the indigenous cultures, the traditional systems, but also from the natural world itself, and incorporated whatever scientific research is happening. Me being a scientist, but I also acknowledge does not know it all, because that is what we have to be open to new wisdom, or maybe perhaps the old wisdom, and to create those information that we have, those pockets of knowledge into educational systems, because we have to relay that information to our next generation about what is happening, about the issues. And when we integrate all of these components together with the scientific knowledge, with the existing wisdom from the natural world, and then when it goes on to the maybe the educators, they can on a maybe very local micro level, they can teach it to the students, and then they will relate, then they will find that connectivity. Okay, this is the past, this is the history of my little area where I stay on this planet, and this is the issues we are facing, and this is the way we can move forward. So that is something that we were working on as well.
I'm so glad that you're doing the work you're doing, Palomi, because the climate literacy is something that doesn't just happen overnight. It's a process of integrating an awareness of our moment in time for humanity that we are currently occupying, getting that increasingly talked about and integrated to some extent in the culture, so we can start that process of healing our mindsets, healing our societies, healing our economy, which has become perverted, and really therefore moving into a kinder and wiser and more humble situation to move forward. The work you do is so important. And I don't know about you, but when I went into science, I absolutely loved it and I still love it. But I've long known that science is only a tiny part of the solution. And sometimes it can be part of the problem, because we sometimes approach science with that same reductionist mindset. I think I was always a little bit too right-brained to be a good scientist. Somehow it managed to work for me anyway. But I feel that science and facts and logic, I think we all know this now, usually aren't the things that sway people outside of science. You know, people are much more influenced by emotion, compelling emotion, by nostalgia, by faith, by history, by relationships. And so I'm much more comfortable working in those realms and bringing science into it. And I think it seems to me that you are the same in many respects.
True that I also got into science because I was like my family, as I said earlier on, you were telling about my parents and all. They have to, the families, they have to inculcate the connectivity that you have to be kind to nature, to animals and all. So my family did that, like my father, my grandparents, and also I was very lucky to be born in that. Surroundings where we understand, okay, this is a life. You will not just tear off a leaf because it is there. You cannot do, and it cannot do anything to you. So there is that dominating nature that I don't know why people have that over animals and nature in general, but that is why the overconsumption and everything happens. So that when that is there, and also there were these cultural practices there that should not be doing this. I would always question, okay, why should I not be doing this? Why is this happening? So there are a lot of stories, idioms, and many things in our rooted in our culture. So when I started asking why, so I got this interest in learning about environment, and I have been studying environment for these past 15 years now. For basically studying, I have started off my career recently. So what I understood is yes, scientists, science should never be arrogant, and scientists also should not be arrogant that only my field is the best. We have to understand that there's a aspect of cultural responsiveness. So when we inculcate the cultural aspect into our scientific discourse, and then when we share that information, the students or the learners or maybe the community will understand it so much better than if you just take, like, hard and fast like data and share it to the people over there.
Yeah. I would really love to see a much greater focus on pulling out the lessons from all the world's religions. I've been quite lucky to be asked to speak to a number of faith communities over the years, and I'm really interested in the interfaith dialogues that take place about environment and you know, being good people rather than being selfish, entitled people. And you know, I think it's the onus is on all the world's religions to really clarify what their faiths say about these matters. The Catholic Pope produced the encyclical letter called Laudato Si, and just recently the Muslim community have responded with Al-Mazar, and trying to really specify the teachings that relate to responsibility for the earth and for nature and for communities. We need to be reminded of these things. And you and I both grew up with parents that were very conscientious about teaching us to be good people, but you know, a lot of people aren't so lucky. I feel that that was kind of my main privilege, because we didn't necessarily have a lot of money, but we had love, and we had, you know, a kind of nurturing value system that guided us when we were growing up. So faith communities are becoming more and more a part of what I'm doing with the earth repair work that I do now. And so one of the global alliances that I'm working with is this Global Restoration Collaborative. And I'm integrating that into another alliance called the Global Evergreening Alliance, which was set up not by me, and I'm only just joining it. But it's all about earth repair and climate repair. And I'm bringing in the climate repair, the social repair, the biodiversity repair, because we need to focus on all of these things as a philosophy, a guiding set of values that we can look at humanity over the past decade, the past century, really, and see where we have started to go so badly wrong. And that if we wish to have a future, if we wish to have civilizations and societies that function, we need to make big, big changes. But that is entirely possible. The onus needs to be on us simply to recognize that we are at the crossroads of humanity. We have to decide whether to turn right or turn left, or turn up or down, I guess. And so we need to have these national dialogues, community dialogues, household dialogues, so that people are really talking about where we need to go from here and how are we going to get there.
That is very well said. It like really we need to band together everyone all over the world and then go towards a future that is possibly not as dim as everyone is making it to be. On that note, I'll move quickly to the next question about biodiversity and climate change. Can you tell me how does biodiversity loss impact the climate, and what measures can be taken to mitigate this interactions?
A lot of the importance of climate and the importance of biodiversity is related to water and moisture and oxygen. And you know better than I, as a scientist who studies the relationship between the atmosphere and the land, how important it is not to destroy forests, not to destroy grasslands, not to fragment them, but also to make sure that the structure of the ecosystem remains, whether it's a forest or whether it's a grassland. Those environments hold a great deal of biodiversity. When that biodiversity is removed, for example, by, transforming grasslands into agricultural land, and the soil is exposed, all of that carbon is lost to the atmosphere from the soil because it's baked in the hot sun. We know these things, but we still seem to continue to do it. And so when biodiversity is lost and the soil gets barren and baked and hot, then that only exacerbates the heat in the area. It doesn't have the cooling effect of the vegetation. And, I was an ornithologist in my youth, actually even into my past middle age. I don't know, 10 years ago, I was still running an international ornithological program with PhD students and postdocs. But, you know, I look at the loss of birds from habitats as an indicator of the degradation of humanity. But the loss of trees and the loss of vegetation, the loss of insects, ends up having a profound effect on the climate. And of course, vice versa. The increase of climate heating has a profound effect on biodiversity. Not just heating, but shifts in the seasonality of rainfall. The flowering of plants is sometimes quite disconnected now from the emergence of bees. And here around me in the back of the little forest that I live on the edge of, we are having lots of flowers open up early because it has been a very warm and dry winter. And yet there's hardly any bees yet to pollinate any of these flowers. So we end up losing food security because our crops are not pollinated in time, but we also lose the biodiversity that helps keep our ecosystems healthy and stable and thriving and able to support, among many other species, human livelihoods, human populations, human well-being, human mental health, human physical health. All of these things depend on biodiversity in a way that was never very well communicated to economists and political leaders and so on.
That is perfectly true. So talking about ecological services that the biodiversity provides, so we basically focus on maybe the keystone species, like the big ones who are actually more in people's minds. Then we forget that there are so many more ecological services provided by maybe tiny species of plants, animals, insects, and the plants means like anything as well, who are we maybe we have no clue that what they are doing to the ecosystem, unless they are lost. Then we have these all these domino effect of negative impacts going into that particular system because of the loss of those species. So we have to have those values, those monetary, maybe converted to monetary aspects, which most of the ecological services are done nowadays to see the cost and benefit impact. So that has to be done on so much more deeper level to understand the role of the biodiversity has on the climate and the microclimate and the ecosystem. So
Yeah, it's taken us far too long to figure out, for example, that we even have like an internet of the forest. We have the mycorrhizal fungi that help connect trees, help exchange nutrients, but also communicate stress and disease and fire and so on. All of that, we have not had the right open mindset until quite recently to even recognize scientifically.
that is very well said. Actually, I was reading this book by Suzanne Simrad, who says this. And when I went through this book, and then I understood, okay, so there is a neural sort of neurotransmitter going on within the soil and these older trees,
Yeah,
taking care of the younger ones just as a family of community would. So we just do not think any of it. We just cut down the forest, the big ones, and
yeah.
just for
It's amazing. Her books are wonderful. And I've never met her yet, but she actually just teaches over the border. I live quite close to the Canadian border now, in northwestern Washington state. And she teaches at the University of British Columbia, not far away. So I hope to meet her someday soon.
we would love to see how that conversation goes between both of you, because this is something something people not really realizing, and that unless a scientist has put together these words there, maybe it will go through the people's minds now that somebody has written a book on it.
Have you ever come across the book called Braiding Sweetgrass
I
by
have.
Robin Murray? I've just been listening to it on audiobook because, frankly, I haven't had enough time to really read a book recently. So I try to get them on audiobook. And I listen to them either while I'm walking my dogs or out for a run, or often when I'm falling asleep at night, especially when my husband is away, because then I can do these things that I never do when he's around. One of the most beautiful sets of stories about merging scientific insight with Indigenous wisdom and values. I wish every person on this planet could listen to these stories.
That is true. That book about braiding the sweetgrass is very much more into also into cultural, the stories and the oration of the indigenous communities over there, and how those they revere a plant, because a smaller grassy plant, because it is so important to their faith, and they try to preserve it. So we have to understand, we have to bring in these stories together with the science. We cannot be like many people. When I presented my work to some of the more meteorological symposiums I went to, and then they said, okay, this is that knowledge is there, that is okay, those stories are there, but they are not really cannot be connected with scientific studies, because the sciences, the meteorology, the physics and maths is hardcore. But then we have to understand there is a space for that. Because when we understand that, only then we can move forward.
I'm glad you're doing that. And I think that space is increasing, and it needs to increase dramatically. I'm trying to convene people from both those quite traditional technical expert communities, along with people from Indigenous bridging communities and women leadership and youth leadership. And it's remarkable how it takes a while for people to learn to trust someone who's speaking in a very different way. Yesterday morning before dawn, I was chairing a meeting, for example, with an Israeli woman married to a North American, Native American, Indian guy who she was a spoken word poet. He is a guy who's lived in both Western and Indigenous societies. Other people in the meeting were kind of traditional Western experts. And I could see there was a bit of discomfort initially. And then slowly they realize, okay, maybe I'm able to learn something here. And it's a wonderful moment when you get people able to let themselves open up and listen.
That is true. That is true. I think nowadays people are accepting like the knowledge from the other communities as well, because National Academy of Sciences had recently had a conversation on climate change, and where they brought in traditional communities from Alaskan natives, who told their stories, and how songs are made about climate change adaptations, because they had to deal with it in the past. And so through those knowledges, if we can, align it properly, it will really work uh, for the climate repair purpose we have.
I'm
And
going to put a link in the chat, if I may, which you can list later if you like. But it's a paper that I was involved with about 17 other people, called Earth at Risk. It just came out earlier this month. And this, I loved it mainly because it was a pretty potent collaboration between Indigenous and Western, not only scientists, but historians and futurists, sociologists, cultural scholars, on the state of the earth and where we must go. You don't often find the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences publishing stuff like that. So I'm really happy to hear about this other story that you're relating as well.
thank you so much for sharing this article. I'll copy this link. I'll definitely go through the papers, and yes, this is like some something that is a positive step I feel that is happening currently in this world, and that is something to look forward to. Now, because we are like a little short of time, I would just go through one of the there are many things I wanted to ask you, but I would just quickly ask a little bit on uh, mentoring future leaders, because I think that is something important. How do you approach mentoring the next generation of environmental scientists and climate scientists, and what key lessons do you emphasize to prepare them for future challenges in the field? Any suggestion?
Wonderful question. Yeah, and mentoring is one of my very favorite activities, and I'm especially passionate about it. I always approach it not as a one-way street, but as a two-way or multi-way street. I've actually really started to enjoy mentoring small groups of people together, because that peer conversation sets up a really interesting dynamic that I think is often more valuable than just a one-on-one conversation. I try to emphasize to the young colleagues that I have, and my students and postdocs, that the things they've been told in the past may not be true in the future, and their biggest challenge is to become light and nimble on their feet and to watch the horizon. We are entering very changeable times. We all know that. Sometimes there are curveballs that hit us out of the left field, if you like. One thing that I think I didn't adequately anticipate, for example, was the rise of autocracy in the world, and how that could derail a lot of what we do. So I try and help students and young people anticipate that a lot of things we thought would be the case based on the past almost certainly won't be, and that learning multiple skills and building good, strong relationships and really assessing their values and their goals is particularly important now.
That is really well said. What about the family? Like, I'll just like take a couple of more minutes of your time. What about the family issues? What would you suggest? So, imagine we have like little children in our own families or maybe the neighbors. How can we make them a little bit more kinder towards nature? Any thoughts on that you would have?
I think we need to model good behavior ourselves. I'm always dismayed when I am out in public and I see parents with their kids, and it's the parents walking around with a cell phone, not paying enough attention to the kids, not being fully present. And honestly, I can't claim to be perfect on that line. You know, I have a cell phone, and sometimes my kids say to me, "Mom, I'm trying to talk to you." And so I know what it's like. We need to model good behavior. We need to make an effort to take kids out into nature, but we also need to see nature wherever we are, because it is everywhere still. Even if we live in a big city with lots of concrete around us, we can often see seeds flying past in the air. We can see seeds taking root between cracks of concrete and managing to flourish. And those are teaching and learning moments for kids too. But without being able to see nature as it tries to be naturally, as it is out in the natural world, it's hard for kids to understand the therapeutic value of nature. We look around us and we see so much mental health challenge for young people as well as old people. We see enormous physical health challenges, and a lot of the things that we see as inevitable in society can actually be reversed with a good exposure to nature and a good diet, a good natural, wholesome diet, not fast foods. And so these are the things that I think we need to focus on with children. And also just making sure that we really are good listeners. We let them be kids. We let them experiment and explore. In many cities, and in certainly a lot of the Western world, there's a tendency for parents to be so fear-based that they swaddle their kids. They don't let them walk and run and be kids and walk to school. I was lucky when I was a kid. I could walk 4 miles through woodlands and ponds to get to school, and that I'm sure helped me become a naturalist and go into science.
That is, thank you for sharing those thoughts on how to make this world a little bit more kinder by teaching the next generation. And your words are like really resonating with me right now, and I'm pretty sure anyone who hears you will get something very positive, a positive lookout towards our future, because we have had these talks of climate doomerism, eco anxiety, climate anxiety, and the people who are really know the information that is happening going on, like people like us, seeing the temperature rises. We currently have a had a 7-degree rise above normal a couple of days ago, like the day before yesterday, in eastern part of India, which is like going through the worst heat waves. And it is like a urban sprawl with like 40 lakh people living here. So these words, what you say, has like given me a lot to think about, to do something actually about it. And I'm pretty sure it will also work. We can work something on about this on the policy level as well in the future. So with those words, I would like to really thank you for coming today to our program and speaking. And we're really honored to have your views.
It's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege, Pulomi. Thank you so much for inviting me. So glad that we are in contact now. I think we have a lot in common.